426 Hemi should have lost. It didn't, and the people who knew that made sure the paperwork disappeared. 1970 was the last honest year of American muscle. Insurance companies were sharpening their knives. Washington was writing new rules. The factories knew time was running out. So they built the most violent engines they had ever bolted into a production car and pointed them at each other. Chrysler, 426 cubic inches, rated at 425 horsepower. Plymouth Roadrunner. General Motors, 454 cubic inches, rated at 450 horsepower. Chevelle SS. Both horsepower numbers were lies. We'll get to that. Detroit never officially arranged the head-to-head. Too much at stake. A loss for either brand was a marketing catastrophe. But the magazines ran the test anyway, and the quarter mile doesn't negotiate. Stay with me, because the number that settled this fight is not the one you've been told. Let's go back to where this engine was born. The 426 Hemi did not begin in a showroom. It began at Daytona in 1964, where it won all 3 positions on the podium and immediately got banned by NASCAR. Banned in its debut season. The hemisphere combustion chamber design, that's where the name comes from, allowed larger valves, better breathing, and a compression ratio that made rival engines look like lawnmowers. The street version arrived in 1966 with a 10.25.1 compression ratio and twin Carter AFB carburetors sitting on top of an aluminum cross-ram intake. The factory said 425 horsepower. The actual dyno figure from independent testing was closer to 470. Why lie? Insurance. A car rated over 400 horsepower per ton was uninsurable for anyone under 30. Chrysler knew it. So 425 it was. On paper, on the dyno at Woodward Avenue, a different story. The Hemi weighed 745 pounds fully dressed. That matters later. The Roadrunner was chosen as the weapon specifically because it was stripped. No luxury, no comfort equipment, just structure, tires, and that engine. The Hemi Roadrunner weighed 3,785 pounds. It ran the quarter mile in 13:54 seconds at 105.1 miles per hour in stock trim, according to the February 1970 CarCraft test. That is a serious number, but it is not the number that wins this fight. Now let's talk about what General Motors built in response. The LS6 was not supposed to exist. GM's internal policy since 1963 had banned any division from installing an engine larger than 400 cubic inches in a mid-size car. The Chevelle was a mid-size car. The engineers went around the policy. Zora Arkus Duntov pushed. Vince Piggins pushed harder. And in 1970, the 454 went into the Chevelle. GM lifted the ban on itself. That is how serious the threat from Chrysler was. The LS6 ran a 11.25.1 compression ratio, higher than the Hemi, solid lifter camshaft, 4-bolt main caps, rectangular port heads, a single Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel on top, 1 carb, 1 massive carb. GM said 450 horsepower. The independent dyno numbers from Car and Driver in April 1970 recorded 461 horsepower at the crank and 390 horsepower at the rear wheels. 390 at the wheels. Let that land. The Chevelle LS6 weighed 4,000 pounds in street trim. It was heavier than the Roadrunner by more than 200 pounds. That weight delta should have handed Chrysler the win before the lights even dropped. It didn't. Here's why. The LS6 produced 500 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM. The Hemi peaked at 490 pound-feet. Still massive, but the LS6 hit its torque peak lower in the rev range, and on a drag strip, low RPM torque is launch torque. The Hemi was a top-end screamer. The LS6 was a tire shredder off the line. Two completely different power philosophies aimed at the same quarter mile. Now, the dyno sheets, because this is where the official story falls apart. In 1970, both Chrysler and GM were rating their engines using gross horsepower, a figure measured without accessories, without exhaust restrictions, and in ideal laboratory conditions. Real-world net horsepower, the number the engine actually makes in the car, in traffic, with the alternator and power steering pump and exhaust, was dramatically lower. When SAE switched to net ratings in 1972, the Hemi's official output dropped to 350 net horsepower, a 75 horsepower gap manufactured by marketing. The LS6 took a similar hit, but the LS6 had started from a higher honest baseline. Hot Rod magazine tested both cars independently in the same year. Their Hemi Roadrunner ran 13.44 at 108.7 miles per hour. Their LS6 Chevelle ran 13.44 at 107.16 miles per hour. The same elapsed time. The Hemi won on trap speed by 1.5 miles per hour. Trap speed is honest. It tells you total power through the full quarter mile, not just the launch. The Hemi was closing faster at the top end. If the track were longer, Chrysler wins decisively. But a quarter mile is a quarter mile, and on that specific measurement, it was a dead heat. Now here is what neither PR department wanted you to know. The LS6 cost $263 as an option in a Chevelle. The Hemi added $871 to the Roadrunner sticker. You could buy a Chevelle LS6 for around $3,500 out the door. A Hemi Roadrunner ran closer to $4,300 in equivalent trim. For the price of the Hemi engine upgrade alone, you could buy a used LS6 and put tires on it. The LS6 ran identical quarter-mile times for a fraction of the premium. In any rational comparison, that is a defeat for Chrysler. But there is a counter-argument, and it is not nothing. The Hemi is the more sophisticated engine by every mechanical measure. The combustion geometry is superior. The valve angle allows larger valves without shrouding. The dual rocker shaft design is more precise than the LS6's stamped steel rockers. The LS6 was a brute force answer to a precision problem. More cubes, higher compression. It worked, but it was not elegant. Engineers at Chrysler knew the Hemi had headroom the LS6 did not. On race fuel and with a cam swap, a Hemi could reach 600 horsepower. The LS6 at similar abuse would detonate itself apart. But this is a street car test in 1970 in the quarter mile, and on that test, the verdict was a dead heat. Superstock magazine found a slight LS6 advantage when both cars were tuned by the same technician. 1331 for the Chevelle against 1344 for the Roadrunner. 0.13 of a second. That is the margin between these two engines when a neutral party held the stopwatch. The Chevelle won that test. But consider the conditions. A professional superstock tuner optimized both cars. In the hands of a stock showroom driver, the Hemi Roadrunner was arguably easier to launch. The LS6's massive torque meant wheel spin was the constant enemy. Hook the tires wrong and your ET disappears into tire smoke. The Hemi's power came on stronger in the mid-range, a more forgiving launch, more accessible speed. So here is where we land. The official verdict from every credible independent test run in 1970. Straight quarter mile, factory stock, LS6, Chevelle wins by a thread. Door ties, 0.13 when professionally tuned. Trap speed, Hemi wins. It is moving faster at the end of the strip, which means it would walk away on a longer course. Value, LS6 wins, and it is not close. $300 versus $871 for identical elapsed times. Engineering ceiling, Hemi wins. The architecture could go further. The LS6 was at its limit. The rematch Detroit never scheduled ended in a draw that favored GM's wallet and Chrysler's engineering. Both brands had something to hide, and both brands hid it. Now, legacy, because this is where the story gets genuinely painful. The 454 LS6 was discontinued after 1970. One model year, GM killed it. The 11:25:1 compression ratio made it incompatible with the low-octane, unleaded fuel that emissions regulations were demanding. The LS6 detonated itself into obsolescence. Only 4,475 LS6 Chevelle were built in 1970. Today, a numbers-matching survivor commands $150,000 to $200,000 at auction. Some have crossed $250,000. The Hemi Roadrunner outlasted it by 2 years in production, but by 1972, compression was down to 8.2.1, and the net horsepower rating had fallen to 280, a different engine wearing the same name. A numbers-matching 1970 Hemi Roadrunner today will bring $300,000 to $400,000 at a credible auction. The most documented examples have crossed $500,000. The market has rendered its verdict too. The Hemi is worth more because it is rarer, because it is more mechanically significant, and because it wins the emotional argument even when the stopwatch disagrees. That is the honest summary of this fight. The drag strip said draw. The dyno said it was close enough to argue. The engineering said Chrysler built the better engine. The accountant said GM built the smarter package. And history said both of them were running out of time. The rules that killed these cars were signed into law in 1970. The same year, these engines peaked. Detroit was celebrating the summit while the avalanche was already moving. You were here for the receipts, not the mythology. If you watched this far, you are the audience this channel was built for. Drop your verdict in the comments, Hemi or LS6, and tell me if you'd change that answer knowing the price difference. Like, subscribe, and we'll settle the next one.